Hello YouTube. I wanted to make this video about the Flint water crisis that's happening in Flint, Michigan. I'm sure you've probably heard a very common conspiracy among liberal progressives that goes a little something like this. The private sector is constantly trying to sabotage government efforts and then make everyone think that the government is ineffective. And then they can turn around and say, look at how ineffective the government is. If the private sector ran things, they'd be a lot better. Well, these conspiracy theories are everywhere right now on the internet. I recently read at least 2 articles on Reddit attempting to blame the Flint water crisis on the free market, as though it was corporations who sabotaged the effort to just make it look like the government's ineffective so that they could come in and save the day. The arguments presented in these articles were not very convincing. They basically consisted of 2 different talking points. The first talking point was that apparently this whole Flint water crisis was done in an attempt to save money by switching water sources from buying it from the city of Detroit to doing it from the Flint River. This is an extremely unconvincing argument, as though if the government attempts to save money, it's the equivalent of privatizing a business. The second claim that was made was that the city of Flint, Michigan cut taxes for local businesses, and those taxes could have been used to repair the water pipes. So they cut taxes for businesses, they switched water sources to save money, hence this Flint water crisis is the free market's fault. Well, I have a conspiracy theory of my own, and that conspiracy theory is that liberals are projecting. Every time the government screws something up, there's always some convenient excuse as to how the private sector either tricked or forced the government to screw up. And this Flint water crisis is a perfect example of it. So they keep talking about how business taxes were cut and how maybe these business taxes could have fixed the rusting pipes that are responsible for this crisis. But here's how they've changed the narrative. It's not supposed to be taxes that pay for water infrastructure. Water infrastructure is supposed to be paid for by your water bill. The real issue here is that the United States of America charges its residents less money for utilities than almost any other country in the world, water just being one example. So we charge people less money for water per cubic meter than almost any other country. We charge people less money for electricity than almost any other country. And of course, we pay less for gas than almost any other country. Now, as great it is to pay little for these things, it's this money that's supposed to go towards infrastructure upgrades. Obviously, if you need to fix old water pipes to make sure they're not leaking, the money raised from your water bill is supposed to do that. If the electricity grid is inefficient and has several heat losses in the process, I don't know. The point is your electric bill would pay for those upgrades. And if roads need to be repaired, bridges need to be built, and there's potholes everywhere, the gasoline tax is supposed to pay for those. This is how other countries make their people pay for their infrastructure upgrades. And the U.S. just happens to be dead last in all these categories. The real conspiracy here is that while these liberals go on about how corporate tax cuts are responsible for all of our infrastructure upgrades, the real conspiracy is that corporate taxes aren't even supposed to be in the equation, especially when you consider the fact that most of these infrastructure upgrades are supposed to be done on the state and local level. And of course, your electric bill, your water bill, and gasoline taxes are mostly done on the state and local level as well, whereas corporate taxes are done usually at a national level. There are 2 reasons why your bills should be used to pay for infrastructure upgrades other than just, this is what every other country in the world does. Reason number 1 is that if you charge people more money for utilities, people will be less incentivized to use them. As a result, the United States of America uses more electricity than almost any other country in the world, and the United States of America uses more water than any other country in the world because it's cheaper. Whereas raising taxes on corporations doesn't address the problem because it doesn't incentivize people to use these resources less. The other reason why it's a good idea is the fact that it'll just plain raise more money. I mean, let's take gasoline for example. A company like ExxonMobil might make 30 or 40 cents in profit per gallon of gasoline sold. So even if we taxed ExxonMobil at 100%, the amount of tax revenue raised would be about 30 cents a gallon. Whereas European countries are charging their people $3 per gallon in taxes on gasoline. Raising the water bill for Michigan residents by maybe $10 a month would raise substantially more revenue than raising the local tax on businesses by 2 or 3%, or the maximum rate that a local tax can possibly put on. In reality, this water crisis that's happening in Flint is not capitalism's fault. In fact, it's the exact opposite of that. It is specifically a lack of capitalism. Charging people for a resource that doesn't reflect its true supply and demand causes them to over-demand it and leave people with not enough money to actually fix the fixed costs that are associated with running these resources. This whole conspiracy about cutting taxes for private corporations and then shifting the blame to the public sector is really projection. They're the ones who are projecting their conspiracies onto the private sector. Really, these people just don't want to have to pay for the resources they use and act as though someone else is supposed to pay it, while they continue to use more of it than any other country in the world. And that's the real appeal to emotion.